thing I would add to Mark's excellent expose analysis of Tony Blinken is that the State Department is going to be absolutely delighted. And I think that's one of the main reasons that Biden picked him. First of all, he's Biden's uh, uh, closest aide for the past 20 years, but he he began his career in the State Department, so he's one of us. Mm-hmm. And if the State Department ever needed somebody that was one of us, the time is now, because it is so demoralized. So he knows the institution, and he's going to restore morale. And there's another thing here too, before we get to Susan, and that is he will work well, I hope, with whomever is at the Department of Defense, which is absolutely critical. And the Department of Defense usually says, you know, we have to go to war if we don't have diplomats. I think the former secretary just said something along that line. And a very interesting thing is happening now that some of you may or may not see, but it's something you want to check out. Michelle Flournoy, who actually was my boss when I was at Defense, was presumably the shoe-in. But I just saw an article, and that's why I was wondering, why wasn't she now announced with this team? I mean, Mark has an explanation that could be spot on, but it also might mean that Biden isn't choosing her. And if he doesn't choose her, it sounds like it's going to be Jeremiah Johnston. And he is a Black American. So, you know, diversity again. He was the head of the legal team at Defense. The legal team at Defense is something like 5,000 people. He's very competent. He's very smart. He isn't warm and fuzzy in the least. But again, another career person. And I believe he was at HHS, Health and Human Services, under Obama for a brief time. So this is a new wrinkle, because he hasn't worked with that team too as much as, say, Michelle Flournoy has. So keep an eye on this one. Stay tuned. So Susan. So of course this is a big disappointment to me, because I've worked for her. She's a close friend. I know she would be absolutely excellent, and I'm sure that many of you would agree with that after having heard her at the CIR Gala. So what happens now? The only thing I can think of is that for the immediate future, it would be some kind of special envoy. As we've seen, John Kerry, the former Secretary of State, is going to be the special envoy for climate change, which also emphasizes the importance Biden puts in it. So maybe she could have something of the level of Kerry, special envoy for crises, shall we say. And we have a lot of them. I mean, China's a big deal. North Korea is a big deal. And the tragedy in Ethiopia, which Susan knows better than anyone, because she was assistant secretary, and it was involved in the negotiations between Eritrea and Ethiopia. So I think we will see Susan, but we'll have to wait to see where.
And the common wisdom, for whatever it's worth, is that wherever she ends up, at least at the beginning, will be in a position that does not require Senate confirmation, given at least in my view, the kind of unfounded hostility towards her because of Libya and Benghazi. But that's just what I get from reading in the newspapers. So what about, speaking of Susan Rice, her last big position was National Security Advisor, and now Jake Sullivan is the person whose name has been put up. What about Mr. Sullivan? Either one of you?
I'll say a few things. Again, when I was working in Washington, actually, for an undersecretary, Jake Sullivan was the head of the policy planning staff in the State Department. And his background, again, like all of these people, is just really quite amazing. He was a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment before he came into government. He's very young. He's only in his 40s. Graduated from Yale Law School. He had a Rhodes Fellowship in International Relations at Oxford, and then got his law degree at Yale. And you read all of these kind of biographical things, and you think, oh God, this guy must really be full of himself. And yet, I come back to Vicki's comment. Jake is a technocrat. He has specialized his entire career, whether in government or outside, on international relations. He was involved in the Iran nuclear deal with Senator Kerry, and he did all sorts of fascinating things. But when I would be at a meeting with then Secretary Clinton, and he was really very close to the secretary, he was always the youngest person sitting around the big table of the principals. And he didn't speak all that much, but when he did, Jake had something to say. He was incisive sometimes on issues. And he was just really, really impressive. And he was widely respected in the department because he had such substance. And when I heard him speak today as part of the president-elect's presentation of his national security team, he talked about supporting other people. And you thought, how refreshing, because he's not going to be there to try to formulate on his own policy without drawing in other people. And I think that is a great strength that he is going to have. That, again, he knows these people. He's part of a team. And so I'm just delighted. I think, he is going to bring a freshness and an innovative approach, given his youth and openness, that is really going to be great, as a national security advisor.
I would I'd like to talk about the position a little bit, because this is not a position that goes to the Senate for confirmation. The others, other than Kerry, are, because they're cabinet positions. This is the person that runs the foreign policy nitty gritty for the president. And what you have to do is get all those national security agencies, defense, state, Treasury sits on this too. And by the way, that looks like another technocrat, Janet Yellen, and Commerce, no idea at this point, and the intelligence agencies all have to be brought together at the White House, in the basement that you've heard so much about, with a big television screen, so that they can either be there or they can be in their offices in their various departments, and then discuss their positions on major issues, whether it's cyber or whether it's China. Are we going to promote trade? Are we going to defend Taiwan? How are we going to get China to work with us on North Korea? That's critically important. So all these issues have to come to the NSC, and the way they get there is a paper is written by various agencies involved, and then there's the first level, and it's basically the assistant secretary level. And that's when lower level people like myself get to go. And that's when your boss isn't available if you're a deputy. And then the next level, which is the deputies, secretaries of state, and finally a small meeting of the secretaries of the different heads of the different national security departments, and then they give the final recommendation to the president. So that's what he does. He runs herd over all these people. He makes sure they write the papers, and he tries to resolve these conflicts, because people in the Department of State, like Mark and me, really don't like the NSC interfering, do we?
That's true.
And so he has to, massage these egos, et cetera, et cetera. So it's good that he's young and smart and dynamic and doesn't have a big ego out there. He can just make sure the job gets done.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, Vicki, I think it's Jay Johnson who was the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security
Mhm.
after Janet Napolitano, if my succession is correct, who was the General Counsel of the Department of Defense and is now also in consideration. And if he doesn't get that position, he's likely to get something else because I think he was highly thought of in the position at DHS.
Yeah,
So speaking of,
yeah, I think his real name is Jeremiah or something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but I think we called him Jeb though, but I don't know. Anyway,
JH.
thank you for that clarification. People will be looking for the right name now.
Speaking of the Department of Homeland Security, what about Alejandro Mayorkas? Do either of you know him or anything about him?
Well, I
Well,
have
I
a
think
lot to say about him, but go ahead, Mark.
no. Given your Cuban background, I defer to you.
No, you go ahead because you'll talk about his gravitas and I'll talk about his Cuban.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a whole lot to say. I mean, I have not come across him. What struck me today was, again, during the presentation of the various people, something that Biden said when he talked about, the new head of Homeland Security. He talked about what has happened in the last several years and the cruelty that we have seen on our borders and how that has had an impact. And then, he said, we're going to have somebody whose family were refugees themselves and who came here and grew up and was drawn to the rule of law. And that is going to be an enormous difference. I mean, he is the first Latino, to head this department, but also someone who has a refugee background. And that really struck me because his perception, I think, given what he's done in his career, is going to be light years away. And I just think it's so important. And again, along with these other appointments, when you read his background and all of his accomplishments, put that aside and say, what sort of person is he? And I was just struck by the man's personal qualities. But I will turn it over to you, Vicki, who has far more knowledge about Cuban Americans than I ever will.
Okay, so the most important thing about Alejandro is that he was not brought up in Miami. Aha. So he was born in Cuba. His mother was a Romanian Jew. His father is a Sephardic Jew. There was a large Jewish community in Havana before Castro came to power. By the time I was there in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was about 10,000, but they're still pretty active. And so they came first to Miami, but very soon moved to California. And then that makes all the difference because that makes him a democratic Cuban, one that is not obsessed with the Castros and somehow reclaiming their property and reclaiming their country. That said, if anyone's going to have a hard time with confirmation, it is Alejandro because of Senator Rubio, who's already saying, well, I don't know whether I'm going to approve any of these guys. Why is Rubio saying that? Because he doesn't want a change in Cuban policy. And Biden says he's returning to the Biden-Obama policy, of which Alejandro was involved. He went down to Havana and negotiated a security agreement with the United States. And by the way, also, he was very prominent in implementing the DREAMER or the DACA regulations for Obama and Biden. So I suspect that is who well, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio will go after, and hopefully they will not succeed. And so we will hope that Georgia comes out with two Democratic senators, because then it would make it a lot easier. And it really would be a tragedy, because as Mark outlined, he really is the perfect person to come into Homeland Security, and he is well respected by law enforcement, and that's also critical.
So let's just follow up on that. We have a question, which I'm sure is on many people's mind, from Paul Blumhart, which says, realistically, if we have a Republican-controlled Senate, just assume that, what's it going to be like for them to be confirming these, quote, deep state technocrats, close quote, who are planning to resurrect the Iran nuclear deal, recalibrate on North Korea, Saudi Arabia, and on and on? What's the likelihood that McConnell, assuming he's still majority leader, let's just play out that scenario, will think this is a way to show Biden who's boss at the beginning of the administration by making it difficult for these cabinet positions to be confirmed?
Well, I guess that I would say, and it comes back to who these people are. They are not long-term Democratic Party partisans who have taken strong ideological positions. They have worked in and out of government in different roles, but they are not people who are in and of themselves ideologues in the way that we have seen people like Pompeo, for example. And so I think, in fairness, when you look at them, I would come back to what Trump would always say: elections have consequences. We have a new administration, and that administration is going to set these policies. And he has brought in people, obviously, who are going to support him. I would hope that if there isn't a Democratic-controlled Senate, the margin is going to be very thin, maybe 1 or 2 seats. And I would hope, in fairness, that people like Murkowski or Collins or Romney would be open-minded and fair, because these are all incredible people in terms of their credentials. I may be overly optimistic about this, but I think McConnell is going to control fewer people in his quorum this time. I mean, hopefully you'll be in minority, my personal view. But at the same time, these people have great merit.
Well, I would say that Biden couldn't have chosen more middle of the road people if he tried. Yeah. He didn't choose Susan. And I would say simply because he knew the Republicans wouldn't like it. Yeah. He didn't choose Buttigieg or, Amy Klobuchar. There's also, or, any of the Bernie Sanders, although Bernie might get something still, some people talk about labor. But no, I mean, this is, to me, he couldn't have found a cabinet that is less likely to make Republicans, conservatives, to raise their hackles, let's say, because it's a very middle of the road, a cabinet with great expertise, not political in any way, other than they've worked for Democrats. So I think I agree with Mark. He'll get people crossing the line, probably to include Senator Lindsey Graham, who said that Biden deserves his cabinet.
So somebody that both of you I know personally is Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, who is nominated as ambassador to the United Nations. And as a sidebar to that, one of the questions we have, speaking of United Nations ambassadors, is what about Samantha Power? Does anybody think, is there anything in store for her? So let's take up the UN with Linda Thomas Greenfield first, and then any comments about Samantha Power.
Why don't you jump in on that one, Vicki? Because I think you've probably known her for longer than I have, and then I'll share my thoughts.
Oh, okay, so if you make me go first, that still means you'll have to go back to the credentials. But,
I will.
okay, other than Bill Burns, Linda is the best known and most respected career diplomat that we have. And sending her to the United Nations is really a coup for diplomats because it says, yes, you can aspire to this job that is generally political. And even when Susan and Samantha were in it, that was essentially political. This is a career bureaucrat. Linda, and then Mark's going to talk about her credentials because I'm going to talk about a little bit about Linda. This is an amazing woman. She grew up poor in rural Louisiana. So, we're not talking about, the elites. She went to segregated primary and secondary schools. When she went to Louisiana State University, it was under a court order to allow Blacks in. And she didn't have an easy time of it. It probably prepared her for the Foreign Service. One professor, she said, gave her an F. And she said, well, why? And he said, if you don't know why, you shouldn't be here. Obviously, he didn't want her there. Well, she went on, she got a master's from Wisconsin. And in 1994, she was in Rwanda during the genocide. And a crazed militant with probably on drugs, eyes glazed, said, you're so-and-so, and I'm going to kill you. And he had his weapon point blank at Linda. And she said, well, I was afraid, but I didn't panic. And she looked at him and she said, what's your name? And he told her, and she told him, I'm Linda Thomas Greenfield, and I'm not who you're looking for. Yeah. And she wasn't killed, obviously. It was so typical of Linda because what she's really known for more than almost anything other than being extremely competent is compassion and kindness. And that's what she said her mother taught her, and it may well have saved her life in Rwanda.
Yeah. Well, let me say a few things about Linda's career. She had a 35-year career. She was Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of African Affairs. At the beginning of the Trump administration, she would have been happy to stay, but she was one of the first people shown the door, which amazed many of us in terms of her knowledge and competence. She was Director General of the Foreign Service, which meant that she knows almost all of us at one point or another, highly respected as being fair. It's a tough job. You have to adjudicate differences, cases against the department, et cetera, et cetera. She was ambassador to Liberia from 2008 to 2012. And I want to mention a position she had, which has always fascinated me. Linda was Assistant Secretary, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. And you might say, why do you think that is important? And it comes back to something that Vicki has just said. This is not a quick, fast track in the Foreign Service to becoming an ambassador. But Linda's compassion led her to be an officer, both in Washington and overseas, that was concerned about refugees, about migration, about US policies in terms of whom we would bring into the country. And I come back to how important that's going to be when she's in the UN, because President-elect Biden has already said he's going to reverse policies that can have diminished and lessen the number of people who can come into this country across the board. I have a personal story about Linda as well. I was working in an office that dealt with reconstruction and stabilization. I had never served in Africa. And the first day in the job, my boss, whom I knew from Central Asia, told me what he wanted me to do as his deputy. And then when I was walking out, he said, one more thing. And I said, what's that, Ambassador? And he said, well, he said, neither of us is an Africa hand, but this office deals with crises in Liberia and Sudan and in Zimbabwe. One of us has to be an Africa hand. I think it's going to be you, Mark. And so suddenly Mark became an Africa hand. And I immersed myself, particularly in Sudan, because we were sending people into Darfur to help our embassy. And it was a time shortly after Colin Powell talked about genocide there. And I got to know Linda because at the time, she was very much focused on what was happening there. And when I came to the end of my tour and was thinking about what I wanted to do, I went in and I met Linda. And Linda is a very large woman. She has incredible gravitas. And I sat down and I said, you know, I would really like to be deputy chief of mission in Khartoum. And she said, why is that? And I said, well, as you know, I've never served in Africa, but for the last 2 years, I have developed a passion about Africa. I've become an Africa hand. And I feel of anything I could do as a follow-on to reconstruction and stabilization, I would love to do that. I've been a deputy chief of mission before, and would you consider me? And Linda is very funny. She has a side which you may not see, you know, when you see her, because she's very serious these days. But she looked at me and she smiled and she said, Mark, if you were asking me if I would consider you to go to South Africa as the deputy chief of mission in Pretoria, the answer would be no. She said, but we don't have that many people who want to go to Khartoum, Sudan. So yeah. And it is typical of the way that she connects with people. And she really was tremendously supportive of me. She came to Equatorial Guinea when I was there. And she supported me when I went out to Mauritius after I had retired, you know, as an acting ambassador. And, you know, I think, I can't think of anybody in the Foreign Service who doesn't think Linda's absolutely wonderful, that she's brilliant, that she's compassionate. She knows more about Africa probably than any other UN ambassador we've ever had. But she's also served in other places. She served in Switzerland, she served in Jamaica. She is just an amazing woman. And I am just so proud to have her as a friend and a mentor.
So the last one on our initial list here of national security folks is Avril Haynes as the Director of National Intelligence. And I just want to say I'm going to have to leave here in a few minutes. So Sandy, prepare yourself to take over the moderator's chair.
I'm here, Chuck.
But what about Avril Haynes for DNI? What do either one of you think?
Oh, Avril Haynes is really competent, and she's very respected in the intelligence community, and she was a deputy at CIA. But what some of you might remember is that in Susan Rice's book, Tough Love, she's one of the three Furies. Furies. Yeah. Am I saying that right?
Fury.
Thank you. And she's the calm, collected one, the one that often reaches out. But she's an absolute expert on cyber and on intelligence. And again, a relatively young woman. One of the reasons, apparently, or so I've read, that President-elect Biden named his director of national intelligence before the CIA is to underline that that will be, and is, it's supposed to be after the reorganization, the top job. So now we look toward who's the next one. And the name most batted around is Michael Morell, who, like Avril, was deputy in CIA. Mike was actually acting, and he has a great podcast they can learn all sorts of stuff from. It's called Intelligence Matters, and I think it's a wonderful podcast. But I have maybe met her once, and if she's the right person, this is a very organized and competent woman.
Well, and I want to remind everybody that Michael Morell was here in Santa Fe in front of an audience of about 400 at the James A. Little Theater in January, back in a different era, 20 years ago in January, when we were still gathering 400 strong, in conversation with Vicki, and he was fantastic. He was really, really thoughtful and thorough. Well, I said that was the last one, but actually the last one is Secretary John Kerry. And I take it that this is, in a sense, a special envoy. This is a non-Senate confirmed position. But it seems to underscore the importance of climate to the Biden administration. Any thoughts about Secretary Kerry?
Well, one of the things that's really striking is that he will have a seat on the National Security Council, or I know it's called something else these days, but he will have direct input. And given his role in bringing the United States into the Paris Treaty, and the fact that President-elect Biden has said that's the thing he's going to do on his first day, he is going to put us back into the Paris Accord. Having someone of his stature and prestige in that role is enormous. And of course, he knows everybody, having been Secretary of State. And given our record on environmental protection and global warming and everything else for the last 4 years, we're really going to have to rebuild credibility with our foreign partners. I mean, things are not going to get all fixed, on the first day or the first 100 days. But having John Kerry there is really impressive. And the fact that Kerry would agree to the job, given everything else that he's done in his life. But I think the man has an incredible passion, and that is why he's doing it. But your thoughts, Vicki? What do you think?
I agree, but also bear in mind that he was the lead negotiator for the Iran nuclear deal.
Indeed.
There will be definitely an effort to return, but it will be a slog, because we'll have to get Iran to dumb down again its acquisition of fissionable materials, and we'll have to ensure that the other parties, which was even China and Europe and all sorts of other countries, Russia, will even accept us back in. So I think it's nice to have him there, because he's got a lot of gravitas, and I think it's also nice he doesn't have to go through the confirmation process.
Yeah.
Well, I'm jumping into Chuck's chair now. We have lots to say about the folks who have been nominated or tabbed for these positions. Give us some speculation about some of the other posts that have not been filled yet. What are the names that you're hearing out there that could help to complete the cabinet?
Mm-hmm. Vicki, what do you think?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot. Well, we already Jay Johnston.
Yeah.
And I've spoken about him. He's impressive. He doesn't fit the mold of the other people on the team so far. Maybe because he's a little bit older. Maybe because his entry into the bureaucracy and political appointments in the bureaucracy didn't happen until like 2009, because he came in when I joined the defense. But he really gets respect all the way around. If it's Michelle, we all know her. She fits into the team. But it may not be. She may have lost her opportunity. Obama wanted her, asked her to be his Secretary of Defense. She turned him down because she thought she was going to be Hillary's Secretary of Defense. So I guess that's something one should keep in mind when they turn down a job. Janet Yellen was the chair of the Fed, and was not continued when Trump came into office. I know her from Brookings. She was a senior advisor or a non-resident diplomat with Brookings. She's older, very competent, very thoughtful. Middle of the road again. I mean, these are not the people that progressives would have liked to have seen, particularly, shall we say, in defense or treasury, where they would like to see a different type of policy. And there are other ones, but that moves us beyond national security. So I'm sticking with national security. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I will. I'll throw out a couple of non-national security people, and I suppose the first is totally aspirational on my part. But I was listening, and you may help me with the pronunciation, either of you. Barit Harara, the fellow who was the attorney for the Southern District of New York, and has his webcast. And he was talking about the Department of Justice, and he is so incredibly impressive. He is so knowledgeable, and I could see him as the right person to come based on who he is and really set that particular ship aright. I mean, he'd be wonderful. He would also bring diversity, which this administration is very serious about, this coming one. The other person I think we all have to think about very seriously is Michelle Lujan Grisham. I heard her give an interview, and she was asked that, and whether she would consider a position. They said, well, you're being mentioned for HHL's Health and Human Services. And she really hedged a lot. She didn't say no. She talked about how honored she would be and how important it was, and the role of governors and her own experience. And then at the very end, she came around and said, well, but of course, I have an enormous amount to do as the governor of New Mexico. Now, that one isn't aspirational. I would love to see her stay here as our governor, but watch that one. She'd be wonderful at HHS, but we would all be sad to see her leave. So those are the two that kind of jump to mind, which are far out of my field of expertise, but kind of fascinate me.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the governor, because I think she'll say yes if asked, because she's on the transition team.
Yeah.
And when you agree to the transition team, it probably means you have some interest in one of the jobs. But there's also and Deb, do you say Hatland?
Oh yes, Holland. Yeah, Holland. Yes.
Yeah, and I think she's got a good chance because she's Native American. But two people from New Mexico.
New Mexico being in the cabinet.
I don't know. That seems like that seems like a lot.
Yeah, and I hope that Udall finds something. He has so much to offer. But I agree. I think Deb Haaland has the edge. And I think, again, this will be a cabinet of firsts, as we've seen. First woman, Deanna I, first African woman at the UN, first Latino at Homeland Security. But it's not just to check that box. In every case, the person they have chosen is superbly qualified, is absolutely ideal to work as a member of a team. And that's what excites me the most. That for me is such a contrast from what we have seen. So I am hopeful about the future. Come January 20th.
I've got three small little questions for you. And we just have a few minutes left. But first of all, is there a place for President Obama in the cabinet in any of this?
Well, Obama, if he's going to do anything, it would be the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So you have to wait for somebody to leave or die, as the case may be. It's usually die.
Expanded.
Yeah.
And I've been hoping for years that there might be a place for Michelle Obama, but she just doesn't like politics. But what an impressive woman! I mean,
She would be,
yeah, and,
education or health and human services, I
yeah,
imagine.
and what a role she's played in this campaign. I mean, my Lord, that message she delivered about why she thought Biden should be president was just a masterpiece.
She was great. And by the way, Cindy McCain will be an ambassador sometime.
I would love that. I would absolutely
Yeah.
love that. And she deserves to be.
She
She has been magnificent as well.
So one of the things Vicki and I have been talking about is putting a talk together about what's going on in Ethiopia. I know we're not really talking about how this national security or foreign policy team is going to approach the world's hotspots.
Wow.
But Vicki, you get a phone call from your folks in government saying, "What should we do? What should this Biden team do in Ethiopia, for example?"
Well, I want the Biden team to push very hard for a ceasefire and the African Union mediation. The African Union has already named 3 former presidents. They just put out a really great statement calling for this mediation. Unfortunately, the United States has been very slow to the table. We condemned the Tigrayans, the rebels, for shooting rockets into Eritrea, but Eritrea is clearly involved in the fighting, but we're getting very little valid information. I'm working with a group of former ambassadors who were there when I was there to come out with a statement calling upon mediation by the African Union, an end to this tragic humanitarian crisis in the country. But this is existential for Ethiopia. Ethiopia could break up. We could see this turn into a long-run insurgency, which eventually would include the other nationalities within Ethiopia. And it has big consequences for this grand Renaissance dam that's just been built. And Egypt definitely is there maneuvering behind the scenes to weaken the government. Eritrea, which was the traditional enemy, is already involved in the fighting. Djibouti is where the United States, China, the French, I think even the Japanese have a base. We have our drones there. It says major implications for security to the base and security in the Horn of Africa. So we need to galvanize our allies in putting pressure on the government to ceasefire, humanitarian corridor, and African Union mediation.
You know, one of the things that you see, which is quite amazing, are people from Ethiopia, the Tigrayans, now fleeing into Sudan. And it's always been the opposite direction. And given how shaky and unstable this new government is in Sudan, I mean, we all have great hopes, after al-Bashir, that we're going to see, a move towards democracy. But it boggles my mind that people are now fleeing from, of all places, Ethiopia into Sudan. It just is incredible. And I think it gets back to what Vicki has just said. This has implications for the entire region for destabilization. And the US has not had a role. We have said next to nothing. And so, needs a change.
And tragic for the region, tragic for Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the only country in Africa not colonized, and one of the few in the world. And just to see this see it break up, just as its GDP has been at 7%. Yeah.
And to have a Nobel Prize winning president. Nobel Prize for Peace.
Say the Nobel Committee better stop naming.
The
only good one they got was Obama.
Well, last question I'll ask both of you for a super brief answer. What is the one thing you're feeling most optimistic about given these announcements? We'll start with you, Mark.
Well, you know, I come back to something that Linda Thomas Greenfield said today when she talked about the future. And she said, America is back, multilateralism is back, and diplomacy is back. And those three things have been totally absent in the last 4 years. And those are all things that I see with this particular team.
Yeah, it's hard to beat that, Mark. But it's not, it's not back to the future.
No.
Because there's so much division in this country.
Yep.
And our internal politics do have an enormous impact on our international relations.
Mhm.
And I'm hopeful that this very technocratic team understands that and are going to look at what's going on domestically. What can we and can't we get into? I mean, Biden has said that he will focus on counterterrorism,
Mhm.
but is going to be reticent about getting into other conflicts. I have been worried that China could be the war of our time, because it's a rising power like Nazi
Mhm.
Germany, and then England was the stable status quo power, and it didn't go well.
Yeah.
And I think Biden and his team have the gravitas to prevent that possible conflict with China.
Mhm. Yeah. Hope so.
Well, thank you so much, Vicki, as always. And thank you, Mark. Great overview. Boy, we have a lot of things coming up and a lot of things to talk about coming up.
Indeed.
But in the meanwhile, I hope you both and everyone on this webinar has a fantastic Thanksgiving. I hope it keeps
Indeed.
snowing. Just stopped drifting out my window right now. Some water would be a wonderful gift for Thanksgiving, but
Yeah.
everybody stay safe out there and enjoy your turkey at home, and we'll see you, I hope, for our next Journalism Under Fire live stream next Tuesday, December 1st at 10 a.m., where we're going to feature a number of national editors from CNN and Time Magazine and NPR in conversation about how in the world newsrooms make their decisions in this incredibly complex time. So once again, thank you to Vicki and Mark. Always appreciated. And
Pleasure.
Andy, Mark, Chuck.
yes, I do.
Yeah, Chuck too. Happy Thanksgiving. Safe Thanksgiving to everybody.
Bye, everybody.